All right, seeing how it's 6:30, I will call the meeting to order for the purpose of electing a chair and vice chair for the 2021 calendar year. Would someone like to nominate the chair, please? Councillor Kiley?
I'll nominate Councillor Neal.
And Councillor Hutchison, were you seconding that or were you nominating someone else? All right. Moved by Councillor Kiley and second by Councillor Hutchison. Are there any other nominations to come forward? Seeing none, I will confirm that Councillor Neal, you remain interested in being the chair?
I do indeed. One more year.
So I'll close nominations then and call the question that Councillor Neal be appointed as chair of the planning committee. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. And would you like me to do the vice chair process, or do you want to take over?
Please do.
All right, if we can get a motion to appoint someone as vice chair, please. Councillor Hill, just 1 second.
Councillor Carley.
And would someone like to second that? Councillor Osanek. And Councillor Kiley, would you accept that nomination?
I do.
Okay, are there any other nominations to come forward? Seeing none, I'll close nominations and I will call the question to appoint Councillor Kiley as vice chair of the planning committee. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. And I'll pass the chair to Councillor Neal.
Thank you very much. And we have one public meeting for tonight. I will read the notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of this public hearing and process is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning Services. The purpose of public meetings is to present planning applications in a public forum as required by the Planning Act. The following presentations by the applicant committee members will be afforded at an opportunity to ask questions for clarification or further information. The meeting will then be open to the public for comments and questions. Interested persons are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. Interested members of the public can email the committee clerk or the assigned planner if they wish to be notified regarding a particular application. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications unless otherwise noted. The public meeting is held to gather public opinion. An exception to this rule is combined reports, which consolidates the public meeting and comprehensive reports. These applications are deemed by staff as straightforward and routine. This business practice has been in place for a number of years and is received by the applicants as efficient customer service and effective use of committee time. Please note that staff use discretion in determining if an application can be a combined public meeting comprehensive report to expedite the approval process. Public meeting reports are provided to inform the public of the relevant information. Information gathered is then referred back to planning services staff for the preparation of a comprehensive report and recommendations to planning committee. This means that after the meeting tonight, staff will be considering the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When the review is completed, a report will be prepared making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve with conditions or to deny. This committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council. City Council has the final say on the applications from the city's perspective. Following City Council decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the local planning appeal tribunal, but that person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. Tonight, we have a single public meeting, and it's, I believe, represented by FO10. Whoever would like to do the presentation, the floor is now yours.
So, Mr. Chair, we have Yuko Leclerc from joining us tonight. He is the agent for the file, and I'll just ask that Ian commence the PowerPoint presentation for Yuko.
Thank you.
Thank you. And can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. And good evening. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm a registered professional planner with FO10 Planning and Design. I'm here representing the applicant, which is a numbered Ontario company owned in part by Mr. Vishal Valsadia, with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment application for 3028 Princess Street. Next slide, please. Thank you. So on this slide, we have an aerial image showing the broader context surrounding the subject property. What this is showing is that the property is located in just south of the Cataraqui West secondary plant area. It's on the north side of Princess Street, east of Woodhaven Drive and west of Bay Ridge Drive. It's in an area that's predominantly residential, with building heights ranging from 1 to 2 stories. There are some taller buildings, 2.5, and I think there's a 3-story building in Cataraqui Woods, in Cataraqui West, but the general prevailing building height is in the 1 to 2-story range. There are also sort of a smattering of commercial uses along Princess Street in this area, with the concentration of commercial uses sort of building as you move eastward towards Bay Ridge Drive, and then there's a bit of a cluster of commercial plazas at that intersection. The subject site is in proximity to some public parks, some open space and schools that are identified on this plan here. So there are a couple of parkettes in Cataraqui West to the north. There's a larger community park that's planned in a future phase of Woodhaven. That phase is actually final approved, so that park is getting closer to being built. And then there are some green spaces on the south side of Princess Street, but of course, there aren't currently sidewalks on Princess Street. Oh, not quite yet. Thank you. So there are not currently sidewalks on Princess Street, but there are planned to be some sidewalks in the near future. The active transportation implementation plan, for example, sets out the goal of achieving sidewalks on both sides of Princess Street from Rosanna Avenue to Bay Ridge Drive. So that would include the subject site at this location. Now, I don't know if that's been affected by COVID, but that was scheduled in the master plan to be built and developed in 2022. There's also public transit in proximity to the site, but it's right now within 600 meters of the site, the only bus route is on Woodbine Avenue. So it's south of Princess Street. It's not the most accessible route from the subject site. However, the transit master plan does intend to extend transit along Collins Bay Road and Cataraqui Woods Drive to the north, which would bring it in that sort of walking distance radius. And that implementation is planned. It was actually originally planned for 2020, and that got bumped actually before COVID sort of reared its ugly head and changed all of our lives. And it's very possible that it'll be bumped again. So in my correspondence with transportation staff, it's sort of been tentatively identified as being 2021, 2022, in that sort of range. But transit is planned to occur along that stretch of road in the near future. Next slide, please. Thank you. On this slide, we have another aerial image, but showing the property a little bit more closely and more clearly identifying the property itself, what's on it today, and then sort of the surrounding uses. So you can see from this image that there's sort of a mix of uses in the immediate proximity to the site, but it's not particularly developed. There's a row of row houses to the west, which front onto Woodhaven Drive. There's a semi-detached house to the west and similar scale of houses to the east, but a lot of single detached houses here currently. The property is also currently developed with a single detached house. It is a large lot at this time. It's just under an acre in size. It's just under 4,000 square meters. It has about 30 meters of frontage on Princess Street, about 132 meters of depth. But what I'm showing on this slide is that there has been a conditional approval from the Committee of Adjustment to sever off the rear portion of the site and add it to an adjacent property to the west. So the property that includes those townhouses is 950 to 956 Woodhaven Drive. The rear portion of this subject site is planned to be added to that other property. The Committee of Adjustment has already granted approval for that. We're in the process of clearing conditions to finalize that conveyance. So that conveyance actually aligns with the current zone boundaries, and I'll speak to those in a little bit. But the resulting lot fabric, which is the portion that's proposed to be rezoned through the application that's being presented this evening, is the southern portion of the site where the current house is located. So it's about 1,000 square meters, about a quarter of an acre. It's the frontage obviously would not change because it's the only portion of the lot with road frontage. And then the depth would be a little over 33 meters. So it's a fairly square, regular shaped lot. One of the items that was a little bit unexpected that came up as part of the lot addition application was that we discovered that the property was actually had a septic system that's still functional. So it's a property that's actually currently on what's called partial services. So it has municipal water, but it has a private septic system. One of the conditions of the consent is that septic system be removed so that the property can be properly serviced and make use of the existing infrastructure on Princess Street here. And then all of the additional structures along the rear of the property in that portion that's proposed to be conveyed are also proposed to be removed. So the whole rear part of the property would be cleaned up and those structures and materials that are there would be taken away as part of the conditions of consent. Next slide, please. Thank you. On this slide, we're showing the land use designation that applies to the site and the surrounding area. So the property is shown in yellow. It's designated residential. This is a broad designation in the official plan that deals with, that allows a whole range of residential uses, everything from single detached houses and secondary suites, triplexes to multifamily dwellings, neighborhood commercial uses, that sort of thing. It supports a wide range of forms with the strategic intent of meeting the city's housing goals mandated by the provincial policy statement. So the official plan, when I speak to this slide, I often just refer to the land use designation, but I want to acknowledge that it's more than that. It provides some very detailed guidance for all aspects of land development and land use in the city of Kingston, including strategic goals and objectives, indicating where intensification should go, making use of existing infrastructure, and providing criteria for applicants undertaking zoning bylaw amendments such as this one of which is that the application in its entirety must conform to the official plan. Next slide, please. On this slide, I'm just showing an excerpt with the current zoning on the subject site, showing that the rear portion is zone D, and my label is a little bit cut off, but the southern portion of the lot is zoned R1. So the rear portion of the site, this is more or less going to be the last time that I speak to it. Zone D, that's not proposed to change. It's a zoning that allows whatever's there, but it's intended that any redevelopment in that portion of the site would trigger a rezoning. So the R1 portion of the site, which is at the front, allows single detached houses, converted houses, home occupations, public uses, secondary suites, including detached secondary suites, but it doesn't allow the nature of the proposed application, the triplexes that we're proposing on the site today. Next slide, please. So that's the intent of the application, is to rezone the site to allow 2 triplex dwellings on the property and remove the existing single attached dwelling. You can see this on this slide. I've got an image showing sort of a colorized version of the conceptual site plan. And I'll just very briefly speak to that. So the dark brown is the main building footprint. The lighter brown is things like stairs, the front and rear decks, et cetera, sort of projections and things like that. The lighter gray is a walkway. And the darker gray is sort of the vehicular access portion of the site, the driveway, the parking area, and so on. And then, of course, the green is sort of the landscaped area. These are shown generally conceptually, but the building plans are quite detailed at this point. So it's the same floor plan as well for both triplexes. It's just mirrored. So it'll function the same way, just in the opposite sort of form. The intent of the application is to allow these two buildings to be built and the site to be developed this way. It's also intended to allow to address performance standards, so the site doesn't meet all of the provisions of the R3 zone. So we're proposing to change it to the R3 zone and then address some of the performance standards on the site. We're also intending to allow for the future severance of the property along the center, sort of along the middle of that driveway, which is effectively more of an ownership issue. So the proposed zoning would allow 2 triplexes on the site, and that's it. It wouldn't allow anything more than that. And then they would be subject to a site plan control application. And then the lot would be severed, which would provide a little bit of flexibility to the owners with respect to making the property a little bit more saleable, a little bit more appealing if someone wanted to buy just 3 units instead of a whole 6. It gives it a little bit more flexibility from a market perspective. I also want to note, before moving on to the next slide, just some of the details on the site. So the build form that's been proposed has been guided in large part by the current zoning. And my next slide will speak to that. The way that the site's going to function, it's intended to function, is that the driveway, there's currently 1 driveway on the site. That would remain, but it would be shifted over and centered on the property, such as what's shown on the slide here. It would also be 6 meters wide to allow vehicles to sort of come and go. So 2-way traffic, so that vehicles aren't backing up onto Princess Street, waiting to turn into the site as someone's leaving. So it's intended to not interfere with traffic along Princess Street. Each of the units would have a front access and a rear. So they're parking at the rear, they would have a nice convenient access to the front. But in the future, when sidewalks get developed on Princess Street and there's a little bit more opportunity for front access, it'll be a little bit more desirable for users to take advantage of the front portion, the front accesses to their property or to their units. There are some details that are not shown on here. This is a conceptual site plan, so I acknowledge that there are some technical requirements that aren't shown here, things like garbage, snow storage, and so on. These are items that are intended to be worked out in detail through site plan control, things like fences and privacy and so on. So at this time, they're not shown, but obviously we welcome feedback from the committee and the community in terms of helping to identify where certain things should go to help alleviate any compatibility concerns. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that the proposed built form takes its guidance from the current zoning. And that's what this slide here is showing. So this is a table that's comparing some of the key performance standards of the proposed zone against what the current zoning allows. So setting aside that we're proposing 2 triplexes, 2 3-unit buildings, the built form itself, the size of the buildings, the height, the footprint, and so on, the setbacks and so on, are very much in line with what the current zoning allows. So the zoning, the R1 zone allows you to build a single detached house and build a detached secondary suite. So a detached second residential unit that's the same size, footprint, gross floor area as the single detached house. So it allows you to build effectively 2 buildings that are the same scale that we're proposing. Some of the performance standards that we don't meet are the front yard depth. And that's primarily because the current zoning requires a 20-foot setback, and we're asking to just convert that to metric, to go to 6 meters. It's more for keeping in line with the direction of the comprehensive zoning bylaw. More than anything else, there is enough dimension there that if it was necessary to keep it at 20 feet, we likely could, but it cleans up the zoning a little bit and makes it a little bit more consistent with the direction that the city is going versus where it's been in terms of its zoning. The R1 zone also has 2 requirements for side yards. That if you have to have a 4-foot side yard on one side and an 8-foot side yard on the other if you don't have a garage. So we're proposing just about 5 feet, 1.5 meters on either side. And the reason for that is because we're proposing that 2-way driveway in the middle, that 6-meter wide driveway. If we were proposing a 3-meter wide driveway, the built form could align with what the current zoning allows. But we're proposing that 2-way traffic to allow a little bit more flexibility. But all of the other provisions of the R1 zone, the size of the building, and so on, the size of the driveway, et cetera, are already allowed by what the zoning, the R1 zone permits. So the height of the building, the footprint, the amount of landscaped open space, all of those provisions are consistent with what's currently allowed on the site. So, and that's, again, I acknowledge that's not dealing with the fact that we're proposing 6 units, that has more to do with the form, the size of the building that we're proposing is very much in line with what the zoning currently allows. Next slide, please. So this slide and the next few slides, I'm just going to walk the committee and the public through the houses, the triplexes that are proposed here. So this is an elevation showing the front of the triplexes. This is if we recall the conceptual site plan I was speaking to a few minutes ago, this is the unit on the left, so the west unit. So this is showing that we're proposing a 2-story building with a raised basement. So 50% above grade is how the basement would be configured. So it's about 4.5 feet of the basement would be above grade, and then 4.5 feet would be below. So the 2 front entrances that are shown would lead to the main floor unit, and then the upper floor, the second floor. And then just around the side to the left of this image is a door that would be leading down to the basement. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I've characterized it as the ground floor plan, but I acknowledge that it's about 4.5 feet above grade. This is the main floor. So it's the rightmost door that at the front entrance leads to this unit, and it would lead into the unit. You can see sort of the layout. It's a 2-bedroom unit with that front entrance. And then at the rear, there would be access to another small deck for amenity space and some stairs leading down to the parking area. And I'll just dwell on this slide for another moment. At the sort of the left of the side, I was speaking to that door that would lead down to the basement. So on the very left of the image where it says Unit 1, that's the door that would lead down to the basement. So you would walk in that door to a small landing, and then you would turn left and go down the stairs into the basement. Okay. So if I take you back to the porch, so at the very front, there was the 2 doors. The door on the right, recall, leads to the main unit. The second door on the left, there's a little arrow there indicating Unit 3. That would lead to another sort of foyer, and then a set of stairs leading up to the second floor. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the basement floor plan. On the left is the set of stairs leading down into the basement. So those stairs would lead into sort of the common area. This would also be a 2-bedroom unit. And then directly at the very back would be sort of an exterior set of stairs, a little landing, and stairs leading up to the parking area at the back. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing the floor plan for the second floor unit, which is a little bit larger and a little bit more efficient just because of the way that it's laid out and with doesn't have as many stairs and so on. So you would come up the stairs to this unit, and there would be actually a deck on your right facing out onto Princess Street. So providing a little bit of front amenity there. And then leading into the great room and sort of the common amenity areas with the bedrooms sort of tucked in at the back. You can see on the top right of this slide, there's also proposed to be a little bit of a little deck for amenity space at the back, and then stairs leading down to the parking area. So these floor plans just illustrate how the units would function. They would each have 2 entrances, one at the front, one at the back. The idea is to try and provide them with a little bit of amenity space, particularly the upper floor units. But there's a bit of variation. We have some 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom units. Nothing too massive, very much in line with sort of market demand in this area and providing a little bit of flexibility in the range of units and generally the affordability of the unit types that are being proposed on the site. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing the proposed zoning. So we are proposing to change the zoning of the front part of the site from R1 to a site-specific R3 zone. We are proposing some performance standards. So for example, the minimum lot area, we're asking to recognize the 1,000 square meters or so and providing a little bit of a wiggle room there by asking for 990 square meters. Asking to reduce the front yard depth, as I spoke to earlier, from 20 feet down to 6 meters. We're asking to amend the interior side yard. So earlier I was speaking to 4 and 8 feet. Those are the R1 zone provisions. The R3 zone does have more stringent provisions. The R3 zone requires a minimum side yard setback of 10 feet and 16 feet. So we are asking to reduce those both down to about 1.5 meters. We are asking to allow 2 triplexes on a lot. And then as sort of a technical language term, this last provision says, speaks to treating the entire property as one lot for the purposes of zoning. That's sort of the technical language that we often use when we're asking for semi-detached houses, for example. It's sort of a term that allows the whole property to be treated as one so that it can be severed in the future, in this case, along the sort of the central axis of the property. It doesn't mean that you can then do 2 new triplexes on the site. It would limit you would be limited to a maximum of 2 triplexes overall, for example. It wouldn't grant any more permissions. It doesn't get us out of site plan control. Just because we're doing this, we're still having to go through site plan control and that exercise for approval with the city of Kingston. So it's really a technicality to allow that additional lot severance to occur in the future. And I'll note at this point, these are the provisions that we requested in our submission. We've received technical comments from city staff, and there's been some feedback from the public. We acknowledge that there are additional provisions that we likely need to seek amendment for in the zoning bylaw, and those are items that we'll work through as part of the technical review in detail with city staff, identifying which provisions we need in addition and which ones are supportable and which ones are not, and that may affect the plan a little bit, and that'll be described in detail at a later date at a time of a comprehensive report coming back to the committee. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll just note again that this is a site that's in proximity to some schools, parks. It's on an arterial road. It's in an area that's intended for intensification. It's consistent with the provincial policy statement. It's a built form that is consistent with and compatible with the surrounding area. It represents an efficient land use of a property that's in the serviced area of the city. It conforms to the official plan, strategic objectives of the official plan, as well as tests for the proposed medium density residential land use. And it's our opinion that this represents good land use planning. And next slide, please. With that, I thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions or comments through you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your presentation. I will now turn to whoever the staff planner is to make comments on this file, then we'll go into committee.
Good evening. Through you, Mr. Chair, my name is Waleed Al-Baqi. I'm a planner with the city. Notification for the public meeting was completed in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act. We received a total of 6 public comments, and they are attached as an addendum to the meeting. The main concerns are related to the number of units, as well as the building form. There were also other comments that we received about the measures shown on the site plan. The comments received now and any comments that we are going to receive in the future are going to be addressed in the future comprehensive report, which we don't have a specific date for yet. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We will now go to the committee. Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Yes, Councillor Sanik, then Councillor Kiley, then Councillor Hutchison. All of your hands went up simultaneously, so go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. Yes, lots of questions. So I just wondered if the applicant wants to address some of the questions that were sent in those letters, because there are a lot of my questions too. Or do you want me to ask all the questions that were in the letters?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would ask if the councillor could identify specifically the questions. There were a lot of questions and a lot of comments in the written correspondence, and I can respond to all of them, but I think it might be more efficient use of time if there were specific questions that were noted that I can speak to at this point in time.
Sure. So what about the front ditch? What happens with the front ditch?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the front ditch, I know there was some commentary about stormwater management and concerns around the measures there. There is no planned change to the municipal infrastructure along the front. So the ditch stormwater management along the front there's no changes proposed there. It is proposed to drain out to the front of the property. So stormwater flows would continue to drain to the front as they do today. There is a bit of a ditch, that sort of a drainage ditch that runs along the western side of the property line. And through consultation with our civil engineer, there are a few different options of dealing with that particular feature. It could be, brought into a culvert and then drained out into the municipal, the ditch along Princess Street, or we could alter our plan and remove the walkway and maintain a ditch along the west side there of the property to allow that flow to continue.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I don't like the configuration of the two duplexes being east-west, east-west, because just like it says in the letter, it overdevelops the lot. It makes then that you have to remove like 15 out of the 22 trees on the property. How come you can't go the first unit and then behind it, the second unit, so that they're like, so that the walls are facing, east-west, like the front of the house is facing east and the back of the house is facing west. Instead, right now you have it, the front of the house is facing south, Princess Street, and the back of the house you're facing north, right? So like you're making it really wide sideways, and then that is why there's no side yards anymore. Whereas if you had one, like along Princess Street, and then the other one, that then goes to the north, to like the north of that, it would be skinnier and it would probably fit better on the lot, and you might be able to save some of the trees at the front.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I understand the concern, I'll do my best to speak to that. The configuration of the site is driven in, as among other things, by the guidelines for residential lots and the urban design guidelines in the official plan. And there's some very strong encouragement in those documents that buildings be oriented to the street and that they not be situated sort of behind one and the other. And if I'm understanding the comment, that it would result in a configuration where one building is behind the other. So the guidelines that we're working with encourage this particular form and layout. It does also allow for this shared driveway and the shared parking arrangement at the back. So this having this sort of symmetry to the site facilitates that. There are a number of trees that are proposed to be removed. The goal is there's a tree preservation plan that was prepared as part of this submission that identifies which trees are proposed to be removed and which ones are proposed to be maintained. The ones that are proposed to be removed are the ones sort of along the driveway and in the central portion of the site, a little bit at the back of the site. The trees that are along the property lines to the east and west are proposed to be maintained. And there are, as much as possible, the goal is to keep trees along the front because there are some mature trees there, and they provide a little bit of a nice screening to the front. But I also note that there hasn't been a landscape plan prepared because we haven't submitted for site plan control. So we fully expect that we are going to be providing more trees than are shown on the conceptual site plan that was submitted with this application as part of that sort of tree replacement goal that we know is important for sustainability and for environmental conservation and so on. So we expect that there will be more trees than what's shown on the concept plan, and we can certainly provide a little bit more detail about what we're expecting there as part of a future submission to provide a little bit more clarity.
Okay, thank you. What about, through you, Mr. Chair, visitor parking? Where did they park?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we've provided or proposed one parking space per unit, so we are not proposing dedicated visitor parking at this time. We did have a traffic study prepared that looked at this site and the proposed layout. The traffic study didn't recommend it. The size of the units are such that they didn't sort of trigger that desire and demand from the study. But it's certainly something that we can look at, rearranging the site a little bit to provide that additional parking area at the rear. We have quite a bit of landscaped open space to work with. I know we're proposing a lot of hardened surface here, some buildings and driveway and walkways. So as much as our goals are often to try and reduce parking in line with the city's goals for transit and active transportation, there is opportunity here to provide additional parking space given the green space that we have. It would require, we're reconfiguring the rear portion of the site, certainly. because we couldn't fit additional parking, obviously, to the north from what we're showing today. But I think it's something that we could certainly look at.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, parking is a concern, right? Because just like it's identified in all those letters and that you touched on, you cannot park on Princess Street on the north side there. And when they build a sidewalk, whenever day that comes, there definitely will not be any parking on Princess Street. So if you can't park on Princess Street, you have to park in this complex. And it's going to be like, how many units? It's the 2 units and what, 3 floors or 2 floors. Like those people that are living in each one of those units on each one of those floors are going to have visitors, and there's no bus. Like it's not like they can say, oh, visitors, you know, my parents coming for a visit or friends coming for a visit, just take the bus and then take the bus home. There is no bus there right now. And even then, when there is a bus, it'll probably be a bus every hour. Like it's not going to be convenient. Like when you're living downtown, living on Princess, like there's got to be visitor parking for the people that are going to be living in these side-by-side duplexes, triplexes, side-by-side triplexes. There's got to be visitor parking available that's not relying on Princess Street, because that's just too unsafe. And when they put a sidewalk in there, there wouldn't be possible to have any parking on Princess Street. And then I suppose snow removal, that seems to be another factor in the addeds, which I guess will have to be worked out at site plan.
Mr. Chair, that is the intent. That snow removal, lighting was another comment that was raised, and privacy related to that. Those are factors that will be looked at as part of the site plan control application. There was some concern about privacy as well. And one of the items, in particular at the parking area at the rear, I think there was some concern. One of the neighbors to the west had indicated a concern that they have some bedrooms that face out onto that parking area. What's not shown on this particular concept plan, but is shown on one of the documents as part of the supporting material. So there was a noise study that was prepared as part of this project. And that noise study identified a need for the rear portions of the site. So basically the side yards behind the rear wall of the house. The noise study identified a need to put sort of taller fences, 7-foot fences along those property lines as an acoustic barrier, which is also going to have the benefit of providing a little bit of privacy to those 2 properties on either side. And that fence would actually extend along the rear property line. So it would provide a little bit of enclosure at the back and a little bit more privacy for both residents of this site as well as the neighboring property owners.
Thank you. And my last question is, there's also a severance for the remainder of what used to be the property, correct? And that's where you said it's already passed through the Committee of Adjustment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. So the rear portion of the property, there's about 3/4 of an acre at the back that's zoned D for development. That portion of the site does not have road frontage. And there was a severance that went through the Committee of Adjustment earlier this year to convey that land to an adjacent property. So it was severed, but it wouldn't be its own standalone lot. It would be severed, and one of the conditions of that severance is that it be merged with the adjacent property. So it wouldn't be creating a new lot without frontage. I know that was one of the comments that was raised as well. So the result of that severance is that this property gets smaller, the other property would get bigger.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Well, the only way I can see it, I'm not a planner, but the only way I can see that there could be parking for visitors is to make this lot bigger and make that severed lot smaller. So this lot to me should be bigger, extending further to the back to provide more parking for those visitor parking spots. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Kiley, Vice Chair Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, a few questions from me. A few of them are not from me, though I will convey them. They're from the correspondence. The ones from me to start, though, I'm wondering, Mr. Clare, you had the conceptual drawing, and right before that, you had a slide showing the overall site. That image had what appears to be a stream cutting from, I guess, the southwest corner across to the northeast corner. Will the parking lot at the back cover that little stream?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it would not. So the stream, along this portion of the site, so along the southern portion of the site, it runs very much along the property line. And then it's at the very back of this portion of the site, it starts to cut northeast. And it's the portion that's proposed to be severed is where that stream, it's a water course. I'll speak about that in a moment as well. So that water course sort of runs northeast across that severed portion at the rear. So one of the aspects of this proposal early on was that we had an ecologist look at that water course and identify that it doesn't actually have, it's not an ecological water course. It has hydrologic function, certainly. So it carries water for stormwater management, but it's not like habitat for species at risk or any other type of species. So that was one of the first things that we did as part of this, was look at the ecology of that water course and determine the ability to move it. So there would be on this portion of the site, the water course would have to be relocated and either put into a culvert or moved into a swale. And then along the rear portion, potentially there may have to be some works associated with realigning that through a permit with the Conservation Authority in order to sort of control where it's going to go to make sure that it arrives on this site at the right location.
Okay, so will we have that info the next time we see this? Because in addition to the fact that you said you are doing a lot of coverage, including impermeable surfaces like roofs and driveways, I think that will be very important. So can we get more information on that next time?
Dear Mr. Chair, certainly there was a stormwater management report prepared as part of the submission, but I think there's some clarity that's needed there, and we'll make sure that gets conveyed to staff so that they can report on that in their comprehensive report.
Thanks, appreciate it. So my second question is about the height of the buildings, and I'm sorry that I missed this because I believe you did mention it, but how does the height of the triplex compare, or the proposed triplex compare to the adjacent buildings on either side of the site?
The height of the triplexes are at a height that complies with what the maximum height of the R1 zone is, but I believe the houses on either side are sort of in the 1 to 1.5 story range. So they're certainly taller than what's there, but they're within the height that you could build today on the R1 zone.
Okay, so it's as of right. My final question is about the basement apartment entrance. You referenced it to the left of the image that you're showing us. Is that on the driveway side, or is that on the far other side of the site?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So if the driveway is in the middle, the entrances to the basement units are going to be on the exterior. So they're going to be facing outwards towards the neighboring properties.
Okay, that's what I thought, but just wanted to confirm. Thanks. And then a quick question for me, or from the residents who wrote, wondering about sidewalks and the lack of walkability in that neighborhood, and just the increased density on the site, adding a number of people living there, and inability to move around easily other than to drive, which only serves to further Councillor Osanik's point about the need for more parking. So could you speak to walkability and movement on and off the site?
And thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So walkability of the site is limited at this time. There aren't any sidewalks along this portion of Princess Street. There is a signalized intersection at Woodhaven Drive, which allows pedestrians to cross there, but there aren't sidewalks on either side. So currently, walkability is a known challenge here. There's a bit of I think a paved shoulder on Princess Street. So cycling is not ideal either, although there are plans to change that. The sidewalk plans that are proposed for this stretch of Princess Street, basically from Rosanna, which is to the west of the site, it's actually west of Woodhaven, stretching over to Bay Ridge Drive, inclusive of the subject property and the Woodhaven intersection that I was referring to before. That stretch of Princess Street is in the active transportation implementation plan, intended to have sidewalks on both sides of Princess Street in 2022. Now, it's possible that timeline has been impacted by COVID. I'm almost certain that it has been, but I don't have their updated timelines in front of me. So what I can say is that This process, the zoning bylaw amendment application, the subsequent site plan control application, if the zoning is approved, subsequent building permit, subsequent construction, marketing, and occupancy is likely going to take 1 to 2 years. So it's very realistic and very reasonable to assume that there may be a year or two from the time that people move in that where there isn't that sidewalk infrastructure along Princess Street, but it will be coming soon. And it'll improve that walkability along this portion of Princess Street. Now that also aligns well with the planned transit infrastructure on Catwoods Drive. So right now there isn't any bus routes there, but there is planned to be some bus service up along Cataraqui Woods Drive, sort of consistent with the typical level of service that we see in this area of the city. So kind of in the 15 to 30 minute range, I believe. Although I can't say for sure if there's any plans for an express bus route. I'm really relying on my memory of the transportation master plan there. And that bus route is planned to start about a year before the sidewalk would be built on Princess Street in this location.
Fair enough. And Mr. Chair, through you, one final question from me. Actually, the same question. I'm wondering if staff could comment further on that. Claire gave good context, but any thoughts about walkability and site access from staff?
Who would like to answer that? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so you, Mr. Chair, so I don't have much to add to what has been mentioned. I know from contact here with different departments that we had plans in the next 2 years or so. However, I know that they're in the process of evaluating the feasibility, I mean the timeline based on the COVID, and basically everything has been postponed a little bit. But from what I know, it should happen, but the timeline, the exact timeline, we don't know yet.
That's fair. Yeah, I understand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Councillor Hutchison, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Just so I know what's going on here, Mr. O'Kirk, how many bedrooms are in each of the 2 triplexes?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. There's a total of 2, 4, 7 bedrooms. So 2 in the basement unit, 2 on the main unit, and then 3 in the upper floor.
Okay, there's just the way it was written. I was a little doubtful. Okay, so that means there's 14 bedrooms going in here, and you've got 6 parking spots. And so I have the same issues, the same concerns as Councillor Stanek, that there's inadequate parking by possibly a considerable degree here. I mean, we're well out into the suburbs here, and there's no bus service. And I don't know, what are you thinking? There's going to be a couple and 1 or 2 kids in each unit, and one of them doesn't work. I mean, it's done in 1957. So I'm really concerned about that. I'm not sure this works. Also, I read something in the report. It seemed that there are no sidewalks from these 2 proposed triplexes out to Princess Street. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, so the concept plan that was submitted does not show sidewalks there, although I do anticipate that that's something that we'll be looking at more closely, particularly through site plan control, but likely ahead of that.
Okay, so this dovetails again with what the previous 2 councillors were either saying directly or were getting at. And that is, and is there any sidewalks out to Woodhaven?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so that's what I was discussing a moment ago. So currently there aren't, but there are planned to be in the next few years.
Right, no, I can see that. I just wanted to be sure. I thought, oh, we'll just dance right through this, but I'm not sure this works. And I'm also concerned if your argument is that you only need 1 parking space per unit, and then what are the people that are supposedly taking, well, the bus doesn't exist. Even when the bus gets there, what are they going to do in the winter if there's no sidewalks to get out there? And as Councillor Sanik says, it's extremely unlikely the city's going to put anything but once an hour out there to start off until they assess what's going on. So also, I have a question about the EPA that crosses, seems to cross Princess Street and go into the house next door. It's shown cut off by the rectangular retained portion or lot that would be left if it's allowed. How is that house next door to the retained portion built on EPA land?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can speak to that to some degree. There was a like, as part of the Cataraqui West master plan and the secondary planning exercise that went there, there was a watercourse, I believe it's called Highgate Creek, that was relocated. And it was a fairly substantial exercise of relocating the watercourse itself, kind of redirecting drainage throughout the entire secondary plan area. As part of that exercise, there were some other tributary sort of watercourses that were either redirected or otherwise completely affected by those changes that took place. So there are, if you look at a land use plan of this stretch of Princess Street, there's these three sort of prongs of EPA that run to Princess Street. Some of them are just cut off straight at Princess Street. Some of them, such as the one that runs across the neighboring property, are a little, or sort of artifacts and have been left there, reflecting, I think they must have reflected that watercourse that we were speaking to earlier. So as part of the consultation exercise and that natural heritage exercise that I was speaking to, there was EPA shown on this property. So we had our ecologists look at that watercourse and determine if it is actually an environmentally protected area, and consult with the Conservation Authority, who was sort of the arbiter of whether or not this is an EPA. And as part of that exercise, the Conservation Authority determined that it's not in fact an EPA. It's a hydrologic feature, but not of environmental sensitivity. Certainly not from a planning perspective or under the provincial policy statement. So because we were going through a planning exercise with the consent and the lot addition, that boundary was adjusted. So it remains on the adjacent property because they haven't been through a planning exercise that would sort of remove that boundary, which is allowed under the official plan for those types of technical adjustments of EPA boundaries through consultation with the Conservation Authority.
I see. Well, I'm going to flag that for staff because, I mean, I accept your explanation, but the real problem here is whether it actually works in practice. I mean, there's a letter there from a neighbor indicating that you need multiple sump pumps to keep the water in that area out of your basement. So I think that staff should, I see staff sort of waving their hand up. We'll get to that when we have a moment, maybe. You know, I just think that should be looked at carefully. And so that's my questions. We'll come back to it again, I suppose.
Thank you. And I believe Councillor Hill, I saw him waving earlier. So did somebody want to speak to?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I believe Mr. Al-Bakri had a response to that previous statement. If he can jump in before Councillor Hill.
Absolutely. The floor is yours. Sorry, I missed you.
No, thanks, James. So you, Mr. Chair. So thanks very much for the comments about the water feature. Actually, we do have a confirmation from CRCA, and I have it open here, that this does not present any significance, and as it doesn't have any, it doesn't present fish habitat. This is in terms of what we know, but definitely we can follow up again with CRCA and just to confirm, but we were already aware of what's going on from CRCA.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Councillor Hill, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I won't take much time. I definitely agree with what Councillor Osanik and the other councillors have had to say. This almost seems like a premature presentation to me. I'd like to, so often you've said, you know, we're going to look at that down the road, or we're anticipating that this is going to happen. And, you know, those resolutions aren't in place, and, you know, certainly don't have any firm deadlines in terms of, you know, adequate transportation, sidewalks, parking. It just seems to me like this is a little bit premature in coming to us, to be honest with you. The other thing wanted to ask about the residents on that severed, or there's a structure on that piece of severed property there. Is that a residence?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's not. It's an accessory building of some type that I think is safe to say is not compliant with zoning. So the conditions of consent do require that structure be removed.
Okay, my question is that, you know, if this goes ahead and some of the other things aren't completed, you know, would they have access to that property? But you're saying that that's going to come down anyway. So, okay. I do share the same concerns that I've heard expressed tonight. So I think you got a lot of work to do on this one, my estimation.
Thank you. Did I see Councillor Osanik's hand up a minute ago? The floor is yours, and then I'll ask Councillor Kiley Vice Chair Kiley to take the lead. I have a couple of comments, but the floor is yours, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just some more comments about that stream. So yeah, like I know it doesn't have any fish habitat, like it doesn't have significance that way. Where it has significance is that the Highgate Creek stream bed, all in Woodhaven, you know, area. So that would be this house, because you're on the north side of Princess Street, is spring fed. And so it's really, really hard to divert that water through there because it's spring fed and water wants to come where it goes. And that's why there's all the sump pumps. And I've had so many complaints over the last 14 years from the residences, like the two homes that were built on Lisa Street, because the stream comes kind of from the north side right there on Princess Street down to the south side by Matheson Dental, and then kind of wraps around and goes out to Lisa Street and through. And anyway, so I'm not surprised that the CRCA, if they were only looking at it from fish habitat standpoint, you know, if it's, you know, like good habitat for wildlife, that they're saying no concerns, like that's not an issue. What the issue is that it's spring fed and that there's so much water as outlined in the letters of the next door neighbors. So water issues is something that once it's built, there's going to have to be a lot of sump pumps probably. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If I may
yes,
comment to that. Thank you. I thank the councillor for bringing that to our attention, the spring-fed nature of the water in this area. So one of the things that we can do as part of I guess the building permit exercise is undertake a geotechnical analysis. And what that geotechnical analysis would do is provide some very detailed guidance about how the house is going to be built and drained to ensure that sort of groundwater flows that are problematic for the neighbors are not carried forward to these new buildings. So that's something that I think is helpful, and we will, the owners are on the applicants on the call this evening and is hearing this. So that's something that we'll have a conversation. It's not necessarily captured as part of the planning process generally, but it's certainly something that can be done to ensure that there's a little bit more confidence to yourselves and to the public that the homes that are going to be built here are not going to face some of those traditional problems and historical problems that have faced others.
Thank you.
Can I recognize you, Councillor Neal?
Yes, please do. Thank you very much. Yeah, I guess we always allow for site plan questions through this process. And I recognize that a lot of the questions and the questions I have are indeed related to site plan, but I want to make sure that these get addressed, because of course, when they aren't, the district councillor can request a bump up and that slows the process down because there's another public meeting that comes to planning. So I share some of the concerns about parking units. My first question would be to our staff. As the province, and I support this generally, as the province moves towards secondary suites by right, moving towards tertiary suites, I have some real concern given the parking limitations and the overall footprint of this development. Would it be in the zoning that there will be that there will only be six units on this site? Is that something we can include in the zoning amendment?
Thank you. So you, Mr. Chair, of course, that's something that could be done, assuming that the final decision will be the approval for the amendment. We can have conditions or regulation in the zone about a cap for the number of units.
I would appreciate that, given the limited parking on the site.
So you, Mr. Chair, there's a comment I would like to basically speak to. It was about the nature of the application being very mature, meaning that it doesn't have all the details. Staff would totally agree with the comment. Actually, we tried to resolve a lot of the our own comments before we go to public meeting, but it was the applicant decision to go forward, understanding that there will be another layer, another step being the comprehensive report where we are going to be actually able to speak and resolve all the issues.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So more to come. My other, and these are all site plan issues. I know in the core of the city, in the district that I represent, bike storage is always an issue. Given the limited parking on this site and the lack of public transit at this time, is there a plan for bike storage on site?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the bicycle parking scenario here is very similar to the parking in that the bylaw requires one space per unit for vehicles, and it doesn't require any bicycle parking. So we haven't shown any thus far because it's not required by the zoning bylaw, but it is certainly something that can be provided. There is room on the site to provide bicycle parking. There aren't any provisions in this particular bylaw. This is in the Kingston Township bylaw. So unlike the bylaw that deals with the city of Kingston's, the former city of Kingston, where there are standards about what the sizes of bicycle parking spaces, there aren't any such provisions in this bylaw for us to comply with. So we are not showing any. We do expect that some would be provided. And as part of the circulation and the site plan review, even as part of the zoning bylaw amendment, standards can be implemented in the site-specific zone for this site that would require bicycle parking and provide some dimensions. So certainly something that we can do. Thank
you. I look forward to seeing some provision for bike parking, whether it's in the 30-year-old Kingston Township bylaw or not. I think given the limited parking, it's something that we definitely need on this site. The other question, I've been a longtime member of MAC, which is the Municipal Accessibilities Committee. You say you have a fair bit of property. Can we have some assurance that at least one, possibly two of the parking spaces can be built to accessibility standards?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think we can rearrange the parking to make that happen. It's not currently shown because accessible parking spaces are not typically required for triplexes. So because we're proposing 2 triplexes, they haven't triggered that requirement. But I think there's certainly room there for us to make accessible parking a reality at the rear of the site.
Again, that would be appreciated. The other question regarding accessibility, is there any plans whatsoever, given that these are 6 units, and I know it may not be required under the OP or the zoning, but for making at least one of the units potentially accessible?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The site plan and the layout of the site that we're proposing today doesn't allow for a fully accessible unit right now. For a couple of reasons, and I think one of the fundamental reasons is because of the elevation that we're proposing. So rather than proposing sort of 3 stories above grade, we are proposing the current scenario where the basement unit is sort of half below grade and the other 2 units are raised above. So we can have our designer look at a way to add a ramp to one of the units or 2 of the units. I mean, they're mirrored. So if we can do it on 1, we can do it on 2 to provide a little bit of accessibility and to have that option so that one of the units is accessible. So we can certainly look at that as part of our exercise.
I would appreciate that. My final comment, because this is the 21st century, and somebody, usually Councillor Kiley beats me to this question, but is there a provision, or could you include an EV charger station in at least one of these parking spaces? Within 8 years, it's anticipated that the majority of cars on the road will be EV.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Again, the owners are on the call this evening and we will have that conversation. It's not difficult to do at this stage, and I understand this is if it's going to be done, it's better to do it now than retrofit later. So certainly we'll look at that. I mean, the ideal scenario is, of course, to make all of the units EV charging. But at a minimum, I think we can accommodate 1 for each triplex, but we'll look at our options there to make them all that way.
Yeah, it's much cheaper to do it now than to retrofit it later. I appreciate that. That's all of my questions.
Thanks, Councillor Neal. I'll hand the chair back to you, but as I do, I don't know if you noticed during your questions, Councillor Chappelle, the district councillor, popped on. I'm not sure to ask.
I now see him at the bottom of my screen. Did Councillor Chappelle have any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you through your chair, Councillor Neal. With respect to this area, I'm somewhat, start my video. Okay. This area, I'm somewhat perplexed as to the intensification that we're looking at. There's no sidewalk, I'm sure it's already been mentioned. There's no public transit, and there isn't any for the foreseeable future, regardless of what you heard tonight. We have Woodhaven, which is right beside it, which is nothing but a problem for the residents that live on that street. I think that the intensity is too great for this area, considering you have 2 single family dwellings on both sides. I'd like to understand the easement that's pictured on page 34. Is that easement intended to be a future sidewalk, or what is the easement itself? And if there isn't an easement, if that easement is not for a sidewalk, where is the future sidewalk going to be placed in comparison to the site map?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The easement that's shown is I believe it's a sanitary easement. It may be stormwater. It's some type of servicing easement that belongs to the city of Kingston that crosses along the frontage of a number of these different lots. So my understanding certainly is that the expectation is that the sidewalk that's planned for this area would be within the road allowance that exists. Given the timelines that are in play with respect to the implementation, the active transportation implementation plan, I certainly don't think there's enough time for the city to acquire land from all of the different properties here. So my understanding is that it's planned to go within the road allowance on both sides of Princess Street here.
And so where does the road allowance start with regards to that property? Is that property showing the road allowance on page 34, or sorry, 41 of 114 of the package? I apologize. It's 34 of your site plan. So where does explain to me where the sidewalk would go on that picture?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I'm looking at the same drawing, the property boundary, there's where that easement crosses the site, there's sort of these black squares at the 2 corners. Are we looking? Okay, so there's also 2 squares that are south of those ones. You see those? Are we looking at the
do.
same ones? So
Yeah.
those two squares delineate the edge of the property. And there's that line linking them is the property line. So the public sidewalk would be between that property line and the traveled portion of Princess Street to the south there. And I suspect that, again, this is probably an item that staff can provide more clarity on, but I wouldn't be surprised if the existing ditch and the stormwater infrastructure along this stretch of Princess is changed in some way as a result of the installation of the sidewalks. That's fairly typical, that when the sidewalk would be built, maybe the stormwater flow would be put into pipes or something like that. But I don't have the details there. That's certainly something that staff would provide clarity on.
And just to clarify, the number of units that you're looking at per triplex, how many bedrooms per each unit? I'm sorry, I was joined late, so I don't know how many units, how many bedrooms per each triplex unit.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. There are a total of 7 bedrooms per triplex proposed. So the triplexes are proposed to have a unit in the basement with 2 bedrooms, a unit on the main floor with 2 bedrooms, and then a unit on the upper floor with 3 bedrooms. So that would be in each one, they would be mirrored, so they would be the same.
A total of 10 parking spots, you're saying?
We are showing 6 parking spaces. We are showing
Or
1
6.
space per unit, which is what the bylaw requires.
And you feel that's adequate as a consultant?
We feel that it complies with the zoning bylaw.
That's not what I asked. I asked if you felt it was adequate for this type of development.
To be completely frank and through you, Mr. Chair, I do. I think there are some active transportation goals here that are being met through the plan changes coming from the city of Kingston. Do I think it's tight? Do I think visitor parking is something we should look at? I do. I agree. I think those are some very helpful comments and feedback and one of the most valuable elements of these types of public meetings is receiving that feedback that make our plans better. We don't have all the answers as a consultant. So we've put forward a plan that proposes some changes from the zoning bylaw and to meet some other elements of the zoning bylaw. Going above and beyond the zoning bylaw is certainly something that we can do. I do expect that the applicant, so my client, has done development in other areas and has an awareness of sort of the market conditions and sort of controlling for demand of parking for individual units through those types of measures. So they obviously wouldn't be renting to individuals that would be looking for more than 1 car or parking space. So that there are ways outside of the planning process to control for that, but there are ways that we can maximize the utility of the units by providing additional parking. And that's been heard clear this evening.
So just to clarify, so you're suggesting that someone would be refused an opportunity to rent one of these units if they had a vehicle or possibly 2 vehicles. Is that what you're suggesting?
Through Mr. Chair, I speak to my experience a little bit in that way as someone who rented in units that didn't offer parking.
Okay. So would you rent this unit?
Currently, I would not. Through Mr. Chair, my partner and I have cars, so we would need 2 vehicles, so we would not look for a rental in this area. We also.
No, that's fair. That's fair. And that was just trying to understand because, and then the city has a requirement for green space, and I don't see where the green space is really allocated here. I think that what's the minimum threshold for green space for these type of units? And that might be more directed to staff.
Through you, Mr. Chair, maybe I'll start, and if staff want to jump in or correct me, I would appreciate that. So the minimum requirement in the zoning bylaw is 30%. We are proposing 39.5%, and that's landscaped open space. So landscaped open space in the zoning bylaw includes green space, but it also includes walkway. So the walkway is part of that calculation. And if we are asked to provide, if it's necessary or helpful to provide a bit more detailed of a breakdown of whether the green space exclusive of the walkway, we can certainly do that.
Thank you. That's all I have for now.
Thank you, Councillor Chappelle. Yes, I believe our planner wants to speak to this.
Thank you. So you, Mr. Chair, so to add on to the landscape requirement, yes, it's 30%, and the site plan shows that it exceeds that. However, some of the comments that were sent by staff to the applicant, for which we didn't receive feedback yet, is about us not being sure that what is shown on the site plan is actually reflective of the future conditions. So that's something that we need to talk to the applicant about after the public meeting and before going to the comprehensive report, among other kind of concerns that we still have as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I will, yes, Councillor Hutchison, although if we could be brief, I believe there may be public that want to speak to this, but the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just had one other additional question. And it has to do with the, what's identified as the great room. And I'm sure that Councillor Neal would confirm if that configuration was downtown, we downtown councillors would be immediate alert that that room could be enclosed, become a bedroom. So I just want to put that on the stovetop for staff, that there should be something that along the way that says, no, that's not going to happen. So I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Would anybody like to comment? Is that a great room, or is that the same as a living room?
Mr. Chair, that is intended to be internal amenity space for the residents. So a living room, great room, etc. In each case, I believe the great rooms provide access to something that's communal. So in the basement, for example, the great room is needed for access to the rear. And then on both the main floor and the upper floor, the great rooms are needed for so you walk through the great room to get into the unit. So it's kind of the space that has a function that a bedroom would conflict with.
Thank you. I will now turn to our clerk. Are there any hands raised, or if you could explain how to raise your hand?
Sure, Mr. Chair. There are 2 or 3 members of the public present tonight. If any of them wish to address the committee, I would ask that they use the raise hand function within Zoom to do so. To raise your hand, click on the participants icon in the lower menu of Zoom. Once you do that, on the right-hand side, you should see a small button that says raise hand. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to sort that out. And Mr. Chair, we'll now hear from Harold LaRue, who I believe provides some correspondence as well. Go ahead, Mr. LaRue. I'll unmute you.
Thank you. The floor is yours, Mr. LaRue.
Sir, Mr. LaRue, I'll just get you to hit the unmute button if you see that on your screen.
Unmute.
Okay, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Floor is yours.
So there seem to be quite a few zoning bylaw transgressions in this application. The zoning bylaws only allow 1 building on the lot, and they are providing 2 buildings on the lot. That's a 100% transgression. And for 2 buildings, you would need 15,000 square feet or 1,394 square meters, and the lot is only 1,000 square meters. So that's another 40% transgression. The side yard is less than 5 feet, and it's required to be 10 feet. And if the lot is severed down the middle, 16 feet. So that is again 3 times difference. I believe the front yard setback has been explained that it doesn't meet the requirements. The distance from the center line of Princess Street to the building, as I measure it off the drawings I have, is 72 feet, and it needs to be 80 feet. And if the property was severed as is part of the plan, the frontage then wouldn't meet. The frontage needs to be 60 feet, and it would only be 50 feet if it was severed. So I just think that this development is way, way too intense for that property. And because of that, it violates all these zoning bylaws. And the parking spaces shown on the drawing don't meet the Kingston Township parking standard that I looked up. And so I guess it's all because it's too intense a development for a 100-foot by 100-foot lot. And there are stormwater management issues that I think severely have to be addressed. So those are basically my comments.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to our staff first, who may want to address some of those aspects. I believe there have been a zoning amendment has been proposed with some variances. Perhaps you could address some of those that Mr. LaRue brought forward.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chair. Would you like to hear all the questions first before dealing with them, or would you like to deviate from the process? It's your call, of course.
Thank you for correcting me. We will not deviate from the process. So if there are any further questions, your questions will be answered, Mr. LaRue, after all of the public have spoken.
Okay.
Thank you. So, are there other members of the public?
Sure, I will ask that the remaining 2 members of the public please raise their hand in the next few seconds if they wish to speak. And I guess that was a mute point, Mr. Chair. We can deal with the questions from Mr. LaRue at this point as no one else wants to speak.
Thank you very much. I was mistakenly right, I guess. So I will now turn to our planners to speak to Mr. LaRue's concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as mentioned by Mr. LaRue, there's a zoning amendment. Currently, the existing zone, which is a type R, allows only for a single detached home. The proposal is to have a zoning amendment to change it to type 3, which would allow for the proposal. However, within the type 3, which is R3, they are also proposing site-specific provision to accommodate for, and I'm actually looking here at the report, what the exact site-specific requests are related to the minimum lot area, the minimum lot frontage, how deep the lot is, the side yards, and they are also proposing to have 2 triplexes instead of only 1. So all in all, as we speak, there are 5 different deviations from the R3 provisions. And also, as we speak, we identify to the applicant that some other provisions will also need to be included. So such as the one you were talking about a cap on the number of units, as well as also potentially the dimensions for the parking spaces. So yes, the application includes deviations from the existing permitted use, and also it includes site-specific provisions. Also, some of the points that were identified in a previous email with one of the neighbors included the dimensions about basically the distance between the building and the center line. We brought that to the attention of the applicant, and the applicant is looking into it. So in the future, when we come to the comprehensive report stage, we'll be able to speak to these comments in more detail. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Chair.
very much. Mr. Leclerc, was there any further comment you wanted to make regarding those questions?
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to echo Mr. El-Bakri with respect to the zoning performance standards. So there were some additional items that were noted by staff that we are working through our technical response to. So that's the response that we would be providing to the technical comments that have been received thus far. So there were additional zoning items that were noted in that. And then certainly there have been more that have been brought forward by Mr. LaRue. And I thank Mr. LaRue for bringing forward his comments, both in writing and for taking the time this evening to express those concerns and those comments. So some additional zoning matters that we are looking into, in particular, the center line setback. So that's an item that we are exploring with our surveyor to confirm those dimensions. With respect to the stormwater management issues, I'm not sure if if Mr. LaRue was here earlier in the meeting, but there was some discussion about stormwater management concerns as part of the councillors' questions, and I believe those were raised on behalf of the members of the public, including some concerns about stormwater management, some additional clarity that's needed there. So as part of our ongoing efforts in responding to technical comments, both from staff and from the public and council, we will be providing more clarification on the stormwater management design and plans for this site.
Thank you very much. Just a quick question for Mr. Albacre. As these additional information comes forward, I presume that it will go on to Dash fairly routinely, and we could flag that for Mr. LaRue as the Dash answers some of his questions. Is that accurate?
To you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. Any new information will be uploaded to Dash, and also members of the public who were in contact with staff will be notified about any future submission.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, unless I see another hand waving at me, I will declare this public meeting completed, and we'll move on to our regular meeting.
Thank you.
So, I'll call this meeting to order. And
Mr. Chair, I believe Councillor Chappelle was trying to address the committee one last time.
Sorry, your screen was dark, so I missed your waving hand. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, your chair. My question is really to staff. When you get a proposal like this that has so many perversion exceptions required, do you ever say no and just stop it there? Like that, because there's so many perversions to this. I don't understand why you would say yes or even entertain it.
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair. This is the report is still going through technical review. Staff have not made a recommendation on the report at this time. That will be done when the comprehensive report is brought forward. If staff feel they can't support it at that time, based on the policies of the OP, the provincial policy statement and zoning bylaw, we will make a recommendation to that effect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Park. Appreciate the clarification.
Thank you. So we will again declare this meeting, public meeting completed, and we'll move on to our regular planning meeting, which is 01. Look at that. I'll call the meeting to order. Approval of the agenda. Mover and a seconder. Councillor Hill, Councillor Hutchison. All those in favor? Carried. Confirmation.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, that includes the addendum, correct?
Yeah, yes, it does. You were reading my mind. It does include the addendum. I'm moving on to confirmation of minutes from our November 19th meeting. Thank you, Councillor Kiley. Seconder, Councillor Hill. Seeing no hands, I will call that question. All those in favor? Carried. We have our disclosure of pecuniary interest. No. Seeing none, I'll move on to delegations. We have none. Briefings, we have none. I'll just read the brief business comment. This portion of the meeting is open to the public. The city has initiated a new process in which members of the public will have the opportunity to speak for up to 5 minutes on comprehensive reports presented before the Planning Committee. Those wishing to provide oral comments at this meeting will be invited to do so. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston to the local planning appeal tribunal, but that person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the City of Kingston before the bylaw is passed, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. So our one and only issue tonight is in regards to 168, 172 Wellington Street and 99 Brock Street. And so the recommendation is before us. Who would like to tackle this one?
So, Mr. Chair, Niall Odie will be speaking to this presentation, and I'll just ask that Ian start the PowerPoint presentation at his leisure. Thanks.
Thank you. The floor is yours.
Can everybody hear me this evening?
Yes, we can.
Oh, perfect. This is the comprehensive presentation for zoning bylaw amendment D14-018-2020, 168, 172 Wellington, and 99 Brock Street. Next slide, please. The purpose and effect of the application is to create a site-specific C1 zone to increase the residential density from 123 units to 244 units per net hectare, and to adjust the minimum required dimensions for bicycle parking spaces. The applicant is proposing to convert the upper 3 stories of the existing 4-story heritage designated structure into a total of 17 residential units. Bicycle parking spaces would be provided internal to the structure in a secure room, whereas vehicle parking is proposed to be provided through cash in lieu of parking. Next slide, please. The subject lands are located on the northwest corner of Wellington and Brock Streets, 1 block south of Princess, and approximately 1 block east of the downtown transfer point, which provides transit service throughout the urban boundary of the municipality. Next slide, please. This is an image showing the existing heritage designated structure. The proposed development would be the upper 3 stories, internal conversion into 17 units. The ground floor is proposed to be retained as commercial. Only minor exterior modifications are proposed to this structure, and a heritage permit has already been issued for those minor exterior modifications. Next slide, please. With respect to the official plan, the subject lands and all of the surrounding lands are designated central business district, which permits a wide variety of commercial uses and also medium and high density residential uses subject to locational and land use compatibility criteria. Next slide, please. The existing zoning is shown on the left, which is C1-3. This is a heritage commercial zone that permits a wide variety of uses, but has a 4-story height maximum. The proposed zoning is a site-specific C1, C1-54, which carries forward all of the permitted uses of the existing zoning, but increases the residential density and adjusts the minimum bicycle parking space dimensions. Next slide, please. The elevations that were submitted with the application demonstrate that the existing facades will largely be maintained, will be maintained with minor exterior modifications. The largest modification is shown in the bottom left of this image in the dark shaded area. This is a rooftop mechanical deck, which is proposed on the rear of the roof. A portion of the roof will be recessed down, and a level deck will be constructed for the mechanical units to be installed. These mechanical units will largely be screened from view, and certainly from pedestrian view. Next slide, please. With respect to public correspondence, a letter of support has been received for this application. The respondent is favorable in favor of the application and feels that the additional density within the central business district will be helpful for local businesses, and the construction of these units will be helpful for local trades. No other correspondence or comments has been received on this application. Next slide, please. The zoning table for this application is fairly concise. There are only 2 deviations from the existing zoning to increase the residential density up to 244 units, which is 244 units per net hectare, which is 17 units within the existing building, and a small deviation to the minimum parking space, bicycle parking space dimensions, really just reducing from 0.6 meters in width down to 0.45 meters in width. And that's owing to the type of racking system that the applicant is proposing to install. The 0.45 meter width is the specification provided by the manufacturer. Next slide, please. In summary, staff are recommending approval for this zoning bylaw amendment. The proposed high-density residential development is an appropriate location within the central business district, within walking distance of transit, recreational, commercial, and economic amenities. The proposed development will contribute to the conservation and adaptive reuse of a heritage designated building, and the associated permit has already been issued for those minor modifications. The proposal contributes to increasing the total residential density within the urban boundary, and it's thought that the additional residential density and associated population within the central business district will help to support local businesses and local economy. And finally, the zoning amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement and complies with the official plan and constitutes good land use planning. Final slide, please. If this application is approved, then the applicant would be required to obtain site plan approval and also submit an application for cash in lieu of parking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn to the committee, and if the district councillor wants to ask the first series of questions, I'm happy to recognize him. Sorry, Councillor Hutchison, did you have some questions? If we could unmute him. There you go. Floor is yours.
Yeah, it didn't pop up like it usually does. Okay,
Yeah.
So are we at questions or comments?
Questions for now, and then right after the public input, if we have any, then there will be comments.
Okay, right at the moment, I don't have any questions.
Okay, sorry.
I've got a comment
On the
later.
spot.
Okay.
So, any further questions? I have just a quick question. Vice Chair Kiley.
I recognize you.
Thank you. Just very quickly, and this seems fairly intense, doubling the density requirements, but perhaps staff could speak to this. Is this likely to be the norm going forward when we get our comprehensive zoning bylaw before us? Because there does seem to be very limited density allowed under the earlier provisions. I see Andrea Gummo's smiling face. The floor is yours.
Hello, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. I think my short answer to that is yes. I think the old zoning densities were really quite restrictive, and they amount in very low unit counts. Now we've through the new comprehensive zoning bylaw that Laura Flaherty is working on, as far as I know, we're not going to change the density calculation at this point because it requires a lot of changes in the official plan. But that is something that we would like to do going forward, sort of more in the medium term, because we've noticed that it seems to lead to these kind of variances that seem really extreme, but are actually quite appropriate for what's being proposed. Especially in this case when it's really just an existing heritage building that's being retrofitted.
Thank you. And I understand from that the variance about bikes won't be on one bike per unit, but will only be on the width of the bike space. Is that accurate?
That is my understanding. Maybe I'll just look to Niall to give us the thumbs up on that if that's accurate.
Thank you.
Sorry, button. Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. The number of bike parking spaces, they are required to provide 17, one per unit. They are actually proposing to provide 18 spaces, so one extra. But the variance, the reduction is on the width, and that is owing to the type of racking system that is being proposed. It's multi-tiered, and every other bike is actually set slightly above the other, so the handlebars are not anticipated to interact with each other and conflict.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I yield the chair to you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll turn to our clerk and we'll open this up for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe there's one member of the public present. If they would wish to speak, please use the raise hand tool to let us know. All right, Mr. Chair, I do not believe that there are any public comments tonight.
Okay, we'll return to the committee for comments. Councillor Hutchison, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think that the committee can see what's happening here. And this is, as you know, we've had long-standing public discourse, shall we call it, but something more flammable than that, about density downtown and how it's expressed in the building form and location and so on. But this, as we can see, there's no public comment here tonight, and one letter, and that letter's in support. And I think this is the thing at both sides of the whole high-rise debate, as it being about it, both sides have agreed that density intensification is a good thing. It's just how much, where, and how high, and how compatible to the downtown. So this is a retrofit, as Ms. Gummo pointed out. So it's already existing, already is heritage value. And the density will support and give support to the downtown business district and the economy. So frankly, I don't see anything to oppose, since the very minor changes that are taking place are acceptable to me. So I thank the developer for the way they've gone about this, and staff have done their jobs, so I'm happy to vote for this.
Thank you very much. Any further comments regarding this? Seeing no hands, I will declare, oh, I should have, before I did this, asked for a mover and a seconder, so it's on the floor. Councillor Hill, Councillor Hutchison. Any further questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll call the questions. All those in favor? And it passed unanimously. Thank you very much. That moves us on to the final portions. We have no motions, seeing none. We have no notices of motion. We have no other business, seeing none. Correspondence we have received in the addendum, and the date and time of the next meeting is Thursday, December 17th at 6:30 p.m. at a Zoom near you. So I will ask for a motion to adjourn then. Quick, somebody, Councillor Hutchison, Councillor Osanek. All those in favor? Carried. And it's only 8:15. Thank you very much. Our next